So now let's talk about active learning. How does active learning work? Well, part of it, the way it works is you start to change your definition of what success is, what your definition of when you should feel good. That's ultimately what this is about, is understanding, well, when should I feel good, and training yourself into emotionally you feel that way. So I'm giving you some of that because you can just hear from my voice and my tone how I feel about certain things. Certain things I feel good about and I talk positively about, other ones I don't talk positively about. And so that's giving you a sense, and that's giving you the first steps of changing emotionally how you feel about things. But you need to continue to do this stuff on your own. You need to catch yourself anytime you start thinking or being seduced by one of these old patterns, old habits, old feedback loops. You need to interrupt it and then switch to the new one and talk to yourself. Get yourself back to that place where you need to be, where you make sure you're rewarding yourself for doing the right thing. So the first thing is safety. Well, how can you feel safe if you're taking action and there's the potential for failure? The way that you do that is success is just taking action. Success isn't taking action that always works 100% of the time. Instead, success is taking informed action where it's not being a perfectionist, but you've done your homework, and then learning from your mistakes and not making the same mistake more than once. There's a ton of people, I see it all the time. They just keep on making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And sometimes the reason they make mistakes like that is because they don't realize they're making a mistake, because they're not learning from high quality sources. So that could be an issue for you. If you're not doing high quality research, that could be a serious issue for you. Check out my research course to learn more about that. That's the first course in the series. Second thing is your significance, your feeling of uniqueness, of importance, that ego, growth and contribution. That all comes from consistently implementing what you learn. So instead of focusing on your bookshelf and how cool that looks, or all the different things that you've bought, all you focus on is consistently implementing what you learn. This is part of the reason why I stopped buying books and started going digital and keeping stuff in file cabinets whenever possible, is because then I don't see anything. I'm not distracted by a bunch of different things on the bookshelf. It's in its right place. It's organized with everything else in that learning project, but otherwise I don't see it. It's not about the cover. It's not about showing other people, look how much I've learned. What it's about is putting it in its right place so that it's actionable, so I can get that information when I need it. Make sure that you, at a bare minimum, are keeping each this resources for each learning project all in their own place. Next thing is connection. Connection comes from two things: collaboration and feedback. So you should be working with other people, learning with other people, participating in question answer sites, forums, reaching out to experts, finding other people to just be study buddies with, and also feedback. So when you start putting things out into the world, you're going to get feedback from the world, and you're going to get people giving you feedback on what you've created, and then you can improve. So that's a way to get connection out of it. Last thing is variety. The thing that keeps people the most motivated is not getting a positive reward every single time they do something. It's actually variable reward. Variable means maybe 75% of the time you get that good feeling, but 25% of the time you don't. They've made this into a science. Different states and countries that run a lottery, they figured out the exact mathematical proportion. Same thing in Las Vegas, or when you're using these betting machines, they figure out the exact formula of how often to make people win so that they stay addicted to playing that game over and over and over again. Same thing with video games. So it's fine-tuning, figuring out what's the best variable reward, because if it's too easy, people won't want to play. If it's too hard, they won't want to play either. So you have to set up the game of learning and the game of taking action so that it's a game that's not too difficult, but it's also not too easy. If you make it too easy and you say, well, anytime I do anything, then I'm successful, then of course that's too easy of a game. But you don't want to make it too hard where it's like, well, unless every single thing I do is perfect the first time and it makes a lot of money, or it makes a big impact, or it does exactly what I want it to the first time, then I'm a failure. That's also not going to work. So, and the game doesn't have to stay the same. So at the beginning, make the game easy on yourself. as you develop your skills, you can make it more difficult. Everything doesn't have to be the same. It doesn't have to be this super organized structure where you're doing the exact same thing and the exact same goalpost every single time. So you should be adapting to things as you get better. You should make it incrementally more difficult for yourself so that it stays fun and you're staying in the flow. Because all staying in the flow requires is that the difficulty of the problem is not too hard, it's not too easy, and your skills are matched up with that problem. So if your skills are too high, you're going to be bored. If your skills are too low, you're going to be overwhelmed and frustrated. So you've got to be thinking about these things, and you've got to be thinking about, well, right now, am I learning in a passive way or an active way? And just think about when you've been in that place, that state where you're all about taking action, you're really excited about it. Make that one person. You could even give yourself a different name, like I go into accelerated learning mode, or I'm an accelerated learner when I'm doing that. And then every other time I'm a passive learner. And so any experience you have when you're learning, try to separate it in one of those two categories, because when you start doing that, you can build a negative feedback loop for every time you're in passive. That gives you a signal that, okay, I should move to active learner, accelerated learner. And then when you're in accelerated learning mode, you're going to feel good because you're like, okay, I'm in the right mode, I'm in the right place, I'm playing the right role right now, I'm doing it right. So every experience you have, start splitting it into those two categories. And then every time you're in that passive learning mode, remind yourself, break yourself out of it and say, no, don't do that anymore. And then just stop, take the time that you need, maybe take a break. And then when you come back, go back into that new mode, sit back down in that chair in that new mode, because that's going to train you to think differently. You see this with athletes all the time, and I love studying athletes. And you'd think, well, athletes don't know anything about accelerated learning. They don't know anything about, but really what athletes are doing is they're solving problems. They're just doing it in a more physical way. And because they're so focused on performance, because so much of their performance is measured live and in the moment, they have to be really good at getting into the right state and staying there and making sure they're doing the right things all the time. And so you can learn a lot by studying how athletes make sure they don't go into that passive mode, or they don't go into that passive learning mode, or whatever the bad mode or the negative mode is for them, how they snap out of that. So when they get in a funk, they have certain things they do to snap out of it and get back to where they're supposed to be. And that's something you have to develop for yourself, because at any moment in time, you need to be able to recognize where you are, take a step back, get out of that, recompose yourself, and then go back to where you need to be, sit back down in that mode, and then go from there. And that's going to build that new neural framework, that new neural architecture, that neural interstate of a new pipeline of action or a new feedback loop that's going to get you doing the right thing all the time. And once you have that, it's a hard thing to stop somebody who's got that kind of power.